Lori, let's dive into it. It's the June call-ups roster. It is also the Concacaf W Championship roster. Vlatko Andonovski named as 23 players that are representing the USA in Mexico for the 2022 Concacaf W Championship. It's an 8-team tournament, which births to the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup and the 2024 Paris Olympics are at stake. I'm going to run through the roster for you before we get your initial reaction. Goalkeepers, 3 of them called in: Aubrey Kingsbury, Casey Murphy, and Alyssa Nair. Defenders, 7 of them: Alana Cook, Emily Fox, Naomi Girma, Sofia Huerta, Kelly O'Hara, Becky Sauerbrunn, and Emily Sonnet. Midfielders, 6: Lindsey Horan, Taylor Korniak, Rose Lavelle, Christy Mewis, Ashley Sanchez, and Andy Sullivan. And forwards, 7 called in: Ashley Hatch, Alex Morgan, Mallory Pugh, Midge Purse, Megan Rapinoe, Trinity Rodman, and Sophia Smith. And additionally, after those 23 names, Andonovski also named 3 additional players that will be part of the 26-player June training camp for the 2 friendlies against Colombia prior to the team's departure for Mexico. So those 3 extra players are Carson Pickett, defender, and 2 midfielders in Sam Coffey and Jalen Howell. Lori, 23 names on the roster for the World Cup qualifiers, 3 extras added. Initial reaction to these 26 names?
Yeah, I mean, initial reactions is, kind of what I expected. I mean, these aren't far off from what I picked, regardless of what people are feeling. I mean, there is it isn't just about performance for every single player. Mindful, yes, that it should be for a lot of the players, but given that this is World Cup qualifying, this is not the World Cup roster. So, I think that needs to be put in context as well. We should qualify. That should not be an issue, but we need to go in and, as Vlatko has stated, prepared for these games and ready to go. And I think there's a good balance amongst this roster in terms of some veteran players, but also the young talent that we have grown to expect to be on the roster and who, quite honestly, are leading the way. So I really like the group. I really was surprised about Korniak and even Midge Purse. But, with further thought about it, I like the additions of those 2, and I think they will add variety to the attack for this U.S. team. So I think it's a good pick. And we'll get into some of the conversation, which I fully expect everybody in the chat will be excited about.
I mean, why delay this any farther? You said it. We picked a lot of these names a week or so ago when we went through this and we picked our roster. You mentioned Margaret Purse. I had her as my 24th player, so the additional one coming in. But Lori, we're here to talk about this, about your picks. Megan Rapinoe is listed on this roster. You had her initially called in based on her veteran ability and what she's able to do on the pitch, despite not playing every single game with OL Reign, in and out with a bit of injuries. But Vlatko Andonovski has named Megan Rapinoe as one of the 7 forwards called into this. What do you have to say to the people that were doubting you and your choices here?
I mean, I'm not here to get in arguments or anything, because I appreciate the debate and I appreciate people's opinions. And I mean, listen, though, the way that I view this, and I've been a part of a lot of these rosters on the good side and the bad side, and it's not just about performance across the board, especially when you're in a position that Vlatko's in, given that you need to bring in younger players that haven't been in this position. And at least off air, you and I were going through this, and there's 14 out of 23 players on this roster who have not stepped a foot into any sort of major competition at the international level. So that's over half of the team that has never taken place in or taken part in some sort of competition that they're about to take part in. And as I mentioned before, listen, we should, and the expectation is to qualify no matter what. And that puts us in qualifying for the World Cup and Olympics. However, I do like the balance that's on this roster, and quite frankly, no one who's debating about this can give me another good call up that they would have in place of Megan Rapinoe, which seems to be the biggest controversial pick for everybody here. Which, I mean, Vlatko stated in his media, it was very point blank. He's had some really good conversations with Megan, knew exactly what she can do, and listen. Honestly, the reality is this was the same on the men's side. You are not going to leave off a player that has proven that they have been one of the best ever and led this team. And this just wouldn't happen. Yes, you would bring in younger players, but this is exactly what would happen on the men's side heading into a world championship. And don't come at me with anything else, because it's just not true.
Yeah.
But I mean, so like I said, no one's been able to give me a legitimate replacement who you would bring in. And Balser, Sid, who I've heard, Morgan Weaver, those aren't it, because Weaver doesn't even start for her team consistently. So, and Sid and Balser are not it either. So until somebody has like a really good replacement, then the point is moot, in my opinion, because Megan has shown that she is ready. Yes, she's been battling through injury, but I think also what Vlatko said in the media, she's going to be playing behind Malpue, who hands down is the MVP of the league currently, right? She has been outstanding, and fully expect her to be leading the way in these World Cup qualifiers and being the main one to lead the line in the front. So
Exactly. Well, everyone in the chat, drop your picks with a bit of reasoning. Lori wants some reasoning. Who else could have been called in instead of Megan Rapinoe? And we need some reasons why. Don't just drop their name. But I agree with everything you're saying, Lori, and more so with what Vlatko Andonovski was saying in that media availability, is that his conversations with Megan Rapinoe were very honest in that, yes, you're playing behind a player like Mallory Pugh, and Megan is very much okay with that and understands her role on the team, which I think is a bigger aspect and a bigger vantage point that a player like Rapinoe brings to this roster, because she's been in World Cups. She's won them. She's won Olympic gold medals. She's played at the highest level in controversy through adversary, which is one thing that Vlatko Andonovski spoke a lot about, is that she's a player that's been through a lot. Her knowledge, her understanding, her mentality, her experience through tough times, getting out on top, the winning mentality that she has is so valuable for this team and for players like Mallory Pugh, but Sophia Smith, Trinity Rodmans, forwards that are in the exact same position as Megan Rapinoe, but Rapinoe will be so instrumental in not only helping them with what they're doing on the pitch and finding their spaces and working through a low block that they're going up against, but also off the pitch. She understands that her job there is to push Mallory Pugh and to get her to be the best player that she can be. But this leads to our conversation about names missing from this roster. And there are a couple of them. And just as we're transitioning from the conversation with Megan Rapinoe, we have to look at a player like Christen Press, who has been playing for Angel City. She's notched a couple of goals. She is not on this list. And Vlatko Andonovski was very clear in his media availability that Press was not on this roster even before the injury that she just suffered this past weekend in the NWSL. And it's not just her performance on the pitch that was into evaluation, but how her performance stacks up against Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith, Mallory Pugh. How does Christen Press not being on this roster compare to Megan Rapinoe being on this roster?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think there's a lot of stuff that goes behind the scenes that a lot of people aren't privy to, right? And I think that probably dates back a little bit. Like, listen, I'm privy to some information and also not to all of it. And I clearly wasn't there at the Olympics, but I guarantee this has to do with a lot of stuff that goes on off the field that people don't know about, right? And so as good as Christen Press has been, I think more of this has to do with like leadership aspect and what that looks like in terms of not only your performance on the field, because in general, Christen Press is going to be more like a Mallory Pugh. And I said this from the beginning too, about what Megan can bring in terms of her play. And Vlatko said it in the media, right? His media availability today, and just the difference. Not a lot of players bring what Megan brings, whether it's 10 minutes, whether it's 30 minutes, right?
Whether it's
this isn't about
30 seconds to score a penalty kick at the end of a game.
Yeah. Or her first two touches, or she hits the crossbar against San Diego this weekend, right? So I think it looks very different from player to player. But I also go back to the 2015 World Cup and somebody like an Abby Wambach, who wasn't playing her best, wasn't going to get 90 minutes. Do you bring her because you know what you're going to get off on the bench, and you know how she's going to respond to being on the bench? And I think that with Megan. Right. And I think there's some internal stuff that we don't actually know with other players. And take what you want with that, with what I'm saying with that. But you can read between the lines. All right. So I think Vlatko has his reasonings, but I think that's probably what it has to do. is behind the scenes chemistry, what you're going to get, how people are going to react to maybe not starting or playing as much. So yeah.
So some people dropping in the chat, I love this, drop your information, your picks for who else could have been. Some people are saying Kristen Hamilton. We got, that's James Miller dropping a Hamilton in there. John saying Jessica McDonald's been with the USA at the World Cup and she has the experience. She's playing for Racing Louisville right now. So just some other names popping up here, but it's a lot of the recent experience I think that Megan Rapinoe brings. And also Christen Press is now injured. We don't know the extent of her knee injury at this point. So despite Vlatko saying that Press was never on this roster, she's not at this point because she is injured. We don't know the extent of her knee injury. Of course, wishing her the best and that it's not too serious and that whatever it is, it's an incredibly speedy recovery. But at this point, she's injured, and that falls into line with a number of other players. But any thoughts from you, Lori, on like a Jess McDonald, a Kristen Hamilton with Kansas City? These are just names that people are throwing into the chat. So
yeah, like they have had good. I think Kristen Hamilton's great at the NWSL level, right? Does she bring something more that's going to beat out somebody currently with our attack in the U.S. Women's National Team? No. And at this point in time, the conversation is around having a little bit of balance with the youth that have been extraordinary and a bit more veteran players on that front line, which in this case would be Megan and Alex Morgan, right? So if you're bringing in Kristen Hamilton, she has no experience at this level. So you're just adding to the inexperience of at the national team level. Jess McDonald did go to the World Cup in 2019. Barely played, though. Has been great. Love Jess and what she brings. Do I think that this is a player that the U.S. needs currently? No. I don't. And so, like, does it take anything away from her value and what she brings? This is just a different level. And we're talking about little nuances. I'm not saying that Megan Rapinoe throughout this. I mean, listen, I think sometimes this gets totally out of context and what people think. It's not like Megan Rapinoe should be playing 90 minutes starting every game. No. But the little nuances that she brings looks very different than what a Kristen Hamilton and a Jess McDonald brings. Even very different to what Christen Press. And I have been at the highest level, and in these moments, it's not just about what you bring on the field. It's about how you're bringing players together, the chemistry. A makeup of the team is not always the best 23 at any given time. It's about who can work the best together, who's going to bring that chemistry, who's going to bring the camaraderie, who knows what it takes to be there. And you know that. You get that. And somebody from Vlatko Andonovski, who was in his first major tournament last year, which would have been a real shock when it came to the Sweden game, right? There's a learning curve for Vlatko as a head coach as well back then. And also, this is the toughest position that any U.S. coach has ever been in, with Jill Ellis not nearly having to make these tough decisions, right? Because of there was a very core group that was in their prime at the time consistently. So this is like about the nuance of a conversation. It doesn't mean that Kristen Hamilton hasn't done really well. Again, love her, or Jess McDonald. But what are they bringing that's going to add, right? And so that's where the Press thing is. Yeah, I am friends with Megan. This isn't somebody just tweeted like Lori's friends. Yeah, Ralph, I am. This is also like just like a common understanding of what it takes to put rosters together as well.
Exactly.
The team isn't going to not qualify if Megan's not on that roster, if Press is, and Press wasn't injured. I'm just saying also Vlatko Andonovski would have a real understanding what some of these players would bring and what it takes at a certain time to have the best roster to get the job done.
Exactly. That it's so much of that comes down to it. And Vlatko Andonovski was very clear about that, saying, I have had conversations with Megan Rapinoe. And from my understanding with what he was saying, it was more on the lines of, yes, Megan, we need you there for what you can bring off the pitch. You're not going to start and get 90 minutes. It's more of how you can contribute and having those conversations, and Megan understanding her role has shifted on this team. And I think that's where a big part of this comes in, and that type of conversation.